Okay, part two here on the video on landscape composition. So just to review a little bit, don't take pictures of stuff that's not interesting. Where are the things most interesting? Let's take this image for example here. We got one flower and then a whole bunch of grass up on the tundra. Not a whole lot of interest there. We got these rocks, those were interesting. We got the mountains and the clouds, and right there, that's interesting, and then a whole lot of blue sky. It's not interesting. Take out anything that's not interesting. So just because you put something interesting at the rule of thirds is that one flower, look, put it out there at the sixth line, still not interesting. There's still a whole bunch of boring grass here. So whatever you're looking at that's interesting, if it's in your foreground, get close to it. Get as close as you can. Put it about 2 to 3 feet out, and it will often improve your image. Also, cut out the sky where things are not interesting. So I moved up closer. This was interesting in real life, but not a lot of color here, not a lot of detail. But what really caught my eye was all these yellow avens with the red color of their leaves as they change into fall. The sky up here was turning pink. It was really cool. And then I saw these little details, these little flowers of the moss Campon, and that was also interesting. And I found some interesting rocks, but still, there's nothing really interesting right here to make this image work. Also, the lines that you see are often horizontal. So I kept moving forward and I found this image. This is an HDR image, but I found nice reds here in the foreground. I found nice big rocks to use. This rock over here was interesting. If you look at the composition, this is more rule of sixths and rule of eighths than rule of thirds. Here's our third lines. Most of the interesting stuff is up top, on the left, on the right, and on the bottom. But we had color. That's what really makes a lot of images work, was the green color, the reds that were here, and then the red in the sky. That's where things are interesting. So zoom in, get closer, and don't be a tourist. Don't just take the one shot and walk away. Really work it and find that perfect composition and hit the shutter when it's pretty. So here's a perfect example of a documentation shot, and I find it to be really ugly. I took this shot just to show how much of the pine trees on the far side of the Kawanichi Valley were really dying. But there's nothing great about the shot. There's no foreground really to tie you in. It's a bunch of shadows. It's bad light. But here's a great situation. I was walking back in Moraine Park, and the sun was setting, and the clouds were just perfect, and all this was turning perfect. I had a great view of Stones Peak, but I had a bunch of cars. There was billions of people here, and I had to run up the hill and finding a foreground. I was looking for a foreground, and I saw that rock was kind of interesting, and this bush I had just ran by had some rocks right by it. That was interesting. I combined those two together, lined them up with the backside of Stones Peak, and got this shot. We've got detail right at our feet. We got detail moving out to the distance, all the way out, and the god beams coming down off the sunset really made that shot interesting. And shooting it in HDR gave me the ability to really bring out all the colors and the tones that I saw that my camera couldn't. So here's a perfect shot of something completely boring. Flat line, really nothing interesting down here. This curve was kind of interesting. This is kind of cool, but it's really not all that interesting. But going over to this was interesting. There's mountains back there. Turning the camera vertical, pointing the camera down to some nice rocks. Because of the light, I turned it black and white with a sepia, gave it a little bit more definition. A little bit more interesting. Great? No, but it's more interesting than this. So, pardon me, take the shots that are the most interesting. Here's Bear Lake in the fall. Classic shot. If you get here when the lake is perfectly calm, you get this wonderful reflection. That would have been really cool. But the lake's ripply. You can't hardly see the reflection at all. Use some rocks down here. But you still can't see a lot of detail. But if you go up on the hillside where the aspens are, there's a little gap. And you can put wonderfully pretty yellow aspens and orange aspens in front of all that lake and still have Long's Peak out there. And if you look, the top of Long's Peak is about 1/8 from the top of the image. There's a little bit of room, and getting all that, we focused down here. We have this area down here. Used a high f-stop, f16, to get everything in focus, but added that gap. It also balances. Look where the trees are as well. The trees are about 1/8 to the side, the trunks, to tie in the image. Don't put things exactly at the third. Also look at the lines. This is the other side of Bear Lake. We actually took that picture from up in one of those corners there. But look at these lines. The line of the lake here comes around, and we use the rocks to add depth and add dimension. You can tell that it's pretty far over to this side. But we have a little bit of reflection down here, but it wasn't perfect. But if you shoot it vertically, none of the lines match. We have vertical trees, but in a perfectly still lake, this would have been interesting. You would have vertical trees, but they're horizontal lines because of the ripples. So look at the lines that the image gives you, and look how you can add depth. There's a lot less depth in this image than you have here. So taking a look at that same idea, you have to find things that are really interesting. Trust your eyes with something that's interesting. There was elk out here. That was cool, and there was bright yellow aspens, and there was neat lines, but it still is a crappy image because there's a lot of boring stuff in between. You got to find it where it lines up just perfectly, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Shoot where it's interesting. So you find somewhere interesting. You get up there to Dream Lake on a great day. One thing to try to avoid is shooting the moon. The moon is best when it's close down to the edge of the mountains, but look at where the moon is just out there with a bunch of blue sky. Not interesting at all. And it also takes away a lot of the depth that we could add by putting our camera down. So take a look. We point our camera downwards more. Now we've got more depth. We have a nice leading line here. We have some nice rocks. A little bit of the reflection. But here's where landscape is really important about light. Getting the right light is really going to add or make or break that image. So we're waiting around for sunrise, and as the sun started to rise, oh man, now we've got pink and oranges shining down here into the ice. Again, we have nice lines coming out, these leading lines. What a leading line is really important about is it points you to the image. It takes you into the image. You don't want to have a log coming straight out the side. Try to avoid cutting off rocks so that there's just tips. Cut off the rock so you know you meant it to be there. Take a look at those aspects. Don't cut off parts. Don't add things. And you look up here with the sky, you go to our rule of thirds line. The sky's about 1/8. It's a bunch of blue sky. Adding a whole bunch of blue sky doesn't add anything to the image. Point your camera down. So here the light started changing. Using HDR is able to bring out even more detail. I wanted to not cut off this tree because it really added, and I was looking for things that I could cut off. If you look, the things that are cut off, it really doesn't distract you too much. You don't want to cut off things that are really distracting. So look through your viewfinder. Once you set up your shot, you think you really have it, before you hit the shutter, check all 4 of your sides. Look for things that are distracting. Look for things that you could add. Look for lines that you could add to make the shot even better. So waiting and waiting and waiting, I moved over. I wanted to get the reflection in here. That was kind of cool. But we filled the reflection with some rocks. The rocks, it was just a bunch of reflection. Not very interesting, but a nice leading line pointing you up to Hallett's Peak. But again, blue sky, really not all that interesting. So you keep shooting through. Then there was a photographer here. He moved out of the way. And that was kind of interesting. That makes it a good composition. And the reflection here, that's kind of cool. Again, a leading line taking you up and over. Nothing's really cut off. The mountain has a little bit of room up there. But you keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and then all of a sudden, clouds showed up. And look at the difference from the sky here, a bunch of blue empty sky, to putting some clouds in it really adds a lot of depth. So I ran around and found a good place to compose, had some nice wiggly lines. That image won Image of the Week in November of 2009 on birdphotographers.net. That's what you're looking for, trying to make things work for you. So let's take a look at some waterfalls here. No, this is all kind of interesting, but that's boring. That's boring. This is kind of boring here. Find the interesting stuff. That was a little bit better, but still kind of far away. Break it down. This was what was interesting, the lines. And then the waterfall breaks into many parts and pieces. That's much more interesting than a solid stream. Then I found this puddle, aiming the camera down. Got the puddle and added that all together with the flow. Nice line. Going straight up to the breaking of the rocks. That's much more interesting than a solid stream. And then following, that was interesting, but this was even better. Now is over here that interesting? That's just solid white. This is solid white. I could take it out and break it down into this image. That's more interesting than this, I find, because we have some empty areas. Filling up the areas with interest. Here again, fill up the area with interest. This image is turned pure black and white. There's the original. That's not interesting here, not interesting there. Fill it up with interesting stuff. Put interesting stuff in your image. Wherever it's interesting, add it.